Democrats are trying to flip both U.S. Senate seats in Georgia next year. Last week, Senator Johnny Isakson announced he's retiring early. The three-term incumbent will vacate his post at the end of the year due to health issues. Senator David Perdue's seat will also be on the ballot. He's planning on running for a second term and has a sizable financial advantage over the field. 3 Democrats are already vowing to take him on. As Greg Bluestein reports in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, with 2 Senate races, Georgia becomes a top political battleground. And Greg joins me now from Atlanta. Thanks for joining us, Greg. You write there's, quote, no doubt about Georgia's battleground status now. What factors have contributed to putting the state in play ahead of 2020?
I think part of it is the fact that we have 2 competitive U.S. Senate races. Control of the U.S. Senate could very well come down to Georgia. We already have competitive congressional races in Atlanta's northern suburbs, and Democrats have long vowed to compete in Georgia on the presidential level and flip the state for the first time since 1992. And they're looking to Stacey Abrams' example. She came within about 55,000 votes of an upset victory over Republican Brian Kemp last year. So Georgia, Democrats and Republicans down here agree that Georgia is very much in play.
Well, Greg, I know you reported on how Democrats are increasing their focus on labor unions for this election. How else have we seen Democrats shift the way they're mobilizing in the state?
Democrats took a cue from Stacey Abrams and started focusing more and more on energizing voters who usually skip elections, whether they be midterms or presidential races. You're seeing Democrats already working on mobilizing, on knocking on doors and canvassing and identifying liberal-leaning voters who could potentially vote for them, but who usually skip these elections. And they're doing so by embracing liberal policies that past Democrats in Georgia have not embraced. We're talking about gun control, Medicaid expansion, income equality measures, climate change, criminal justice reforms, all these issues that more centrist candidates kind of shied away from. Democrats now are embracing, not just here, but you're seeing it at the presidential level, too.
Right. It's really fascinating to hear about these shifts. What do Georgia voters think of Senator David Perdue?
He is a formidable candidate. There's a reason why no high-level, no very prominent Democrat has gotten into the race against him so far. You've had 3 candidates, but they're not the most well-known candidates in Georgia. Stacey Abrams passed on the race. Sally Yates passed on the race. Other prominent Democrats have passed on the race. He is a formidable fundraiser, and he has deep ties to President Trump, and those can be used against him, but they also set him up to be a very, very forceful and powerful opponent. But now that this Isakson race is also in play, you're going to see Democrats who passed on that race as well reassess that.
Right, and it's up to Republican Governor Brian Kemp, as I understand it, to fill Senator Isakson's vacant seat until a special election is held. Isakson's resignation is effective on December 31st. Do we know how Governor Kemp is handling this decision?
Has been fully immersed in planning and preparing for Hurricane Dorian as it sort of streams through Georgia.
Right.
But I think pretty soon his attention will shift more to filling this Isakson seat. And he could go conventional. He could go with an elected official who has already been proven at the ballot box, who can help energize the base. Or he could go outside the box and pick someone who can broaden the Republican appeal, maybe an African-American, a business leader, someone who's not an elected official, someone who's not a status quo figure like he was. And he was an elected official, but he was not the favorite coming into last year's election. So he has a lot of different options to choose from. He got a small galaxy of Republican officials to select from when he starts looking at this race.
And how much will the Senate race in Georgia be a referendum on President Trump being at the top of the ballot?
On President Trump. You've got 2 Senate races that will probably go the same direction as the presidential outcome in Georgia. And that's why so many Democrats at first were reluctant to run, because even though the gap is narrowing, Republicans have held Georgia in every election since Bill Clinton won the state in 1992. So it's a tough hill for Democrats to climb. At the same time, that gap is narrowing, and Kemp has to select someone who not only can stand with President Trump in 2020, but also can stand with him in 2022, because whoever he picks, if he or she wins, would stand on the ballot again in 2022 when he faces re-election for a full 6-year term.
And how confident are Republicans in Georgia that they will actually hold on to both of those Senate seats?
Republicans are confident, but they also know that Democrats are right on their heels in a way that they haven't been in years. The last presidential election, Trump won the state by 5 points. The last big statewide election before last year's vote was Perdue and Governor Nathan Deal, and both of them won by 8 points. Last year was a wake-up call to a lot of Republicans when Stacey Abrams lost by about 1.5 points. And so Republicans know they've got to step up their game in order to remain the dominant party in Georgia.
Well, who are the Democrats we should be watching for who might be running for either seat?
As I mentioned, there's already 3 Democrats in the race against Senator Perdue. Lesser known figures, but all of them could become national stars in their own right. And that race is expected to expand. I'm looking at John Ossoff as a highly likely contender for that race. In the Senate side, on the Isaacson side, there's a small constellation of figures looking at that race. One of them is Lucy McBath, the congresswoman who won the 6th district race in northern Atlanta suburbs. She's a national gun control advocate. She's raised a lot of money from out of the state, and she would be a formidable fundraiser if she ran. Michelle Nunn was the 2014 Democratic nominee against David Perdue. She lost by about 8 points, but she's looking at coming back. State Senator Jen Jordan is a potential contender. DeKalb CEO Michael Thurmond, DeKalb District Attorney Sherry Boston. The list goes on and on and on. No fewer than a dozen Democratic contenders have expressed credible interest in this race, and people who could mount a formidable campaign.
Right. Sounds like a lot to watch there. Greg Bluestein with a view from Georgia for us. Greg, thanks for sharing your reporting with us.